Could you make Formula One racing better with the addition of Active Aerodynamics? We're talking fan cars, active suspension, active wings, the lot. Because we have a sneaking suspicion that it could help cars run closer together, enabling more overtaking and generally improve racing. So how would you do it? Could Formula One ever do it? Well, let's get into it. Now, it's all well and good saying add all the toys. Active aero, active suspension, fans, 3,000 horsepower, and so on. And yes, you could create something that is the peak of automotive technology, but it would probably be impossible to drive, as it would likely exceed what a human could process, and you definitely couldn't race it. So we're going to look at this with the idea to improve racing, and if we can make the car a bit faster and show off automotive tech along the way, well, then that's great. So currently, aside for DRS, Formula One uses only passive aerodynamics. Passive does seem like a funny word for something so insanely complex, but the aero package, wing angles, brake cooling, ride height and setup are all locked in before the race. And as we've seen over the last years, the wings do deflect with load, but the aerodynamics aren't actively changing. This setup has positives. It's much simpler. It makes the teams lock in a setup and means the slipstream is pretty strong, as the wings create a lot of drag on the straights. But there is still the dirty air problem, and it is better now, but it's still there. These are all the things that would change if Formula One were to implement Active Aero. Firstly, let's chat about adding fans. And for any of you that saw the incredible lap at Goodwood this weekend, you'll know why I'm talking about this. That car has two fans at the rear of the car that create the majority of its downforce by sucking air through ducting, essentially evacuating air from a sealed floor. And it's incredible, given that the car weighs just under 1,000 kilograms, the fan creates 2,000 kilograms of downforce. And yes, it can of course do that at any speed. Then there are wings, so at 150 miles an hour, the car has another 250 kilograms of downforce. And that's absolutely insane. Now, the Spearling isn't anything like a Formula One car. It's electric with over 1,000 horsepower and has a similar footprint to a 60s Formula One car. And the fan system is key to being able to make a high downforce car that small. Traditionally, you need a big floor and diffuser to create big downforce. But with a fan, you don't. It makes the current generation of Formula One cars look like land yachts. But let's say we tried it. How would you fit this system to an F1 car? We've had Scarbs take a best guess at how you could do this.
You'd have to think about how you would package it at the back of the car, where you would suck the air from, how the side pods would work would probably be very much similar, but just ending in one big fan or a couple of fans, and then you'd have to worry about how you get it around the crash structure and all the business between the rear wheels. How do you power a couple of big fans? Even if it's directly off the engine, that's going to be sucking 100 to 200 horsepower out of the engine. You're certainly going to end up with a less powerful car, but with much more powerful aero. Monaco would be amazing. At Monza, you'd probably want to maybe even turn the fans off and get the extra horsepower back to the car. I think aero should be driven by the speed of the car and the air flowing over it, rather than it being powered by the engine. So he has a point. This won't always be useful, but you could fire up the fan in the corners, meaning you don't need all the draggy wings, and then turn off the fan down the straights. But that ruins the slipstream, and that matters, in that typically when racing series have more of a slipstream, for example Mazda MX-5s or Caterham racing here in the UK, you do get much closer racing, because the cars can't in fact break the toe and all the cars gaggle together on track. But you do gain if you make the car smaller. If you could package that V6 with all the hybrid gubbins in a car as small as the McMurtry, you might get better racing, as you could fit 3 cars wide, where normally you can only fit 2. You could also limit the fan speed to vary the downforce, so you could have a slightly more gamified balance of performance. So the championship order could decide who gets the most or least downforce. I expect that would be a controversial decision. So with a complete redesign of the cars, it could work, but it certainly would be a bigger change than this last set of regulations. And Scarbs actually thinks he has a better option for this. Now this at first sounds quite radical in changing the aero surfaces of the car, so perhaps the wings, the side pod inlets and the outlets, perhaps even the brake ducts, moving away when you're on the straights in order to reduce drag, allow the car to use more of its available energy to go faster. And then obviously if you're going faster, then you can recover more energy. And when you do need the cooling, everything opens when you get to a corner and you're braking, the wings come back on. Now, this sounds a fairly radical solution, but if you think every aircraft in the world works on this principle, and we've had active aero in Formula One now for many years with DRS. It is active aero. It reduces drag on the straights. Maybe the rear wing folds right back down on the straights. Maybe the front wing folds away. The side pod entries close up. The brake ducts close into the wheel, and you're up with a very sleek car in a straight line, allowing you to get much more top speed, and then allowing you to then have much more downforce available for the corners.
So that does sound pretty epic. It's not quite like that insane Gran Turismo car, but it still allows for innovation and flexibility in the downforce to drag ratio on a car. It would make policing this pretty complex. But have you seen an F1 rulebook? They're really complex already.
We then look at what would this mean for the racing? From the driver's point of view, you would have more top speed, you would have more downforce for the corners. Theoretically, you'd be able to follow another car better because you could play about with the amount of aero you're changing. So if you are in the slipstream, maybe you just turn on a bit more downforce to overcome the turbulence that you're running in. It would certainly be much better from an environmental sustainability point of view because the cars will be using much less energy and they'll be able to go much faster, which we all want.
Then there's our final idea, active suspension. That doesn't sound like a system for active aero, but in fact it is. We've seen how much ride height has affected car performance recently, with several teams lowering their car for more downforce, but then getting lots of bouncing issues. Then when they bring it back up, everything is worse. Less downforce, more drag, which means more wing angle and even more drag. Active suspension could help out with porpoising, but also help out with drag as well. You could have the car at exactly the ride height you want for maximum downforce in the corners and minimum drag on the straights.
In terms of bang for buck, I think active suspension probably won't give Formula One that much in comparison to active aero or fan-driven aero, for example. But it's still one of those technologies I think does need to come back to Formula One for a number of reasons. I think the main thing would be not to have a complete free-for-all like you had back in the previous active era. I think it needs to be regulated. You could even have some of the standard spec actuators so that the teams aren't developing hugely expensive actuators to move the suspensions. I think really what you want to do is only being able to keep an active control over ride height, which is what they used to do within certain constraints. So the car wouldn't roll too much in corners, wouldn't pitch as you accelerate and brake, and it would make sense for the car to go tail down like we saw with the suspensions over the past few years where the rear suspension clapped on its gas springs. But I think going forwards, it's one of those things which again would be very much like active aero. It's something that's quite high tech, quite forward thinking. It links very well to road cars. It links very well to creating Formula One as a much more high tech, futuristic, sustainable, environmentally conscious sport without really taking away anything, because you're not losing performance, you're gaining performance from these systems. You can see all the benefits there. And I think there does need to be a roadmap to start to reintroduce these.
Adding fans to cars, active wings and active suspension, they could bring better racing and more technical progression. But who knows if it would help racing? I think this current set of regs is actually doing pretty good. You should check out this video about which F1 team has the best engine at the moment. We did a lot of analysis to find out which of them really is the best. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.